Hello, can somebody hear me?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Samuel, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Julian, shall we start? Julian, you are on mute.
Is it better now? Yeah.
Yes.
I see the graph. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is the Pass Computation Element working group session. So I guess you are familiar now with the way of working during those virtual meetings. So just keep in mind that we are recording the session. So as usual, state your name when you start talking. Respect the cues and so on. There's a summary afterwards. So the note well first. You should be aware of them already as well. It's the same as before. Anything you may say related to submitted to the IETF policy with respect to the intellectual property. So make sure that all the process related to intellectual property follow the RFCs mentioned there. Okay, so back to the online tips. So if you run to the one presenting, make sure that your video on your mic are off. Headsets are better. We've witnessed a couple of times people using mic embedded in laptops, and sometimes it turns back the speaker sound. So try to make them the most efficient as possible. The blue sheets are automatically filled in using the data tracker information connected to the Medico tool. There is a chat. We'll try to follow things that may happen on the chat. If someone wants to say something but is unable to reach the virtual queue, we may channel some info from there. I don't think it happens much time, but just in case, be aware that there is this channel available. For more info about the Mitico tool, there are a couple of links here, but I guess that since we're already Wednesday, it should be all right for most of you. So we have Harry acting as a minute taker, but if others want to join the collaborative minutes, we use the CodeEMD tool. So the link is available here. You may help Harry taking down notes here. In any case, thanks Harry for taking those early notes during the meeting. There is some behavior related to the way the virtual meeting are handled. So press the button to join the queue if you want to raise a question. Wait for the chair to give you the floor before starting sending your audio. State your name as usual. And as a reminder, we have a tight agenda. We even have presentation beyond the end of the theoretical agenda. So make sure that questions are included in your time slot related to your presentation. We will certainly use the timekeeper for presenter to make sure that we respect the timing allocated to the slots during the session. So I think you're aware that we have a change within the ADs. So it's time for us to thank a lot Deborah for all the work she's been doing for the PCE working group as an AD for several years. So thank you, Deborah. Virtual claps. It's also time to welcome John as the new AD who will be in charge of the PCE working group. So thank you, John, for taking this role, and we'll be happy to work with you on those topics. The mailing list, as usual, keep in mind that most of the work is supposed to be happening on the PCE mailing list, so try to use it as much as possible, especially to share issues, share resolutions on the action in front of those issues. In case some private discussion happens in the background, it's allowed, but please make sure that after the conclusion, the working group is aware of what has been discussed privately, and make sure that the working group endorses what has been discussed privately. Make sure that everyone is aware of each major steps. It's all the more true for new draft. We see again new draft requesting slots in the agenda, but some of them have never been discussed nor presented on the mailing list, which is a pity. The process here is based on gauging interest and consensus. And if you want to make sure that the consensus is properly gauged, please make sure to introduce, mention, and follow up the work using the mailing list as much as possible. As a reminder, in case there is a tie between slots to allocate to the PCE agenda, we will prioritize more for draft which have been actively discussed using the mailing list as opposed to the one who's just been ignoring the mailing list. We've been also witnessing a couple of times some working group adoption calls or working group last calls with a very limited number of responses. It doesn't really had the chance to gauge interest, so please make sure that at these steps, which are key with respect to the IETF working group way, make sure to express yourself, even if it's a simple feedback. I support, I disagree with this. It's always useful if you have some explanation when you want to disagree something. That's even better, of course, but make sure that your view is expressed, because it's impossible to the chair to distinguish between people just ignoring the work because they don't care, people who are busy, and people who just support but believe it's okay without telling it. So make sure to be vocal on the mailing list as well, especially on those key steps. Review ideas, review document at each stage. Of course, that's always useful. We're working as a community, and the community reviews, output, discussion is always valuable. At any time, we see there are some threads in progress on the mailing list related to individual drafts. It's always relevant. It shows interest on some topics. It's also part of the working process to see early discussion on draft. So consider that each step is valuable, and using the mailing list as well is a way to move forward. We have some cues available on the wiki for working group last calls and working group adoption. So in case you catch error on them, please mention them, contact the chairs and secretary. We'll try to make that up to date as much as possible. So the wiki, here we have a summary of the main items included in the wiki. You should be able to make it up to date if your documents aren't fully covered or not up to date. So the link is included on the slide. So you may have a look on this. It's particularly useful to see where your document lies, because we have those buffers there, and we try to flush them quite efficiently, but it's still, they keep filling in as well. So it's a slow process. Code point allocation. So we have more and more early allocation requests for working group drafts. It requires some specific processing from the chair ID on IANA. It's particularly useful for early testing between multiple implementation to make sure that the implementations are correct and able to interoperate, and that the specification is correct. Keep in mind that in most of the registries, we have also allocated some ranges for experimental code points. So make sure that what you need can't be addressed using the experimental code points before requesting early allocation, because it's quite high in the way the specification must be stable on what will be associated to allocated code points. So don't rush too quickly on the early allocation. Sometimes it's not fully ready. If you really think it's useful, and if it matches the criteria listed in RFC 7120, then we can start an assembly allocation process. We also have this tract over the wiki, as indicated by the link here. The agenda. So it's been shared for a while already. If anyone's want to comment on the agenda. No one, nothing to bash. Okay. So working group status. So since the last meeting, we don't have any new RFC published, but we have 4 with the RFC editor by the Regional Association, PCEP, Association Policy, on flow spec. So they are likely to be published by the next meeting, hopefully. So we'll see how all these will progress. Still with the working group, so an errata has been reported this week. Pretty easy one to handle, so it will be sent to John, I guess, in a very near future. We have some IANA allocation in progress as well. Local protection enforcement will expire in next January. The segment routing policy is in process, and the binding label SID has been requested. So I think I'll leave you the floor, Graf, for the status of the working group IDs.
Thanks, Julian. I'll try to go over the working group ID status quickly. If someone has a comment on their ID, please join the queue, and I will also monitor the queue while I'm presenting. So the first document that we have are the documents which are almost ready and nearing the working group last call. So this would be a good time to review them. The first one is binding SID. This was discussed in the last meeting. Between the last meeting and now, one main change is adding of the PC allocation of binding SID, which was moved from the PCC ID to the binding SID ID. And this was discussed on the list as well. And as earlier said, the next thing would be working group last call as well as INA allocation for this. So we will be starting on this pretty soon. With enhanced errors, we had a refresh. We want to make sure that there is still an interest in this work. We have not seen this being utilized in other IDs yet. So that is also an item that we want to see that other documents use this procedure. So that's something which is lacking. So we want to see whether the working group is still interested. So when we do the working group last call, if you think that this work needs to be published, please show your interest. Otherwise, we will not go forward with this. Just a heads up. With PCEP Yang, a new version was posted. There were a couple of changes with respect to some type defs were changed to identity so that it can be easily extended. There was an alignment with using LSPA identifier TLVs as a key information instead of putting a reference to IETF TE. This was done so that SR case can also be easily handled. Some of the dependencies which we are IETF TE, something related to our TLS are all making good progress. So we hope that this document would also be ready for working group last call soon. We had done an early Yang doctor review, and there is a possibility that before the working group last call, we will get one more done so that everything is proper. Another document which is nearing working group last call is the stateful GMPLS document. This was merged. There was a merge between two separate documents, which was handling the extension for stateful and PC initiate. It was merged as a single document, and there was some editorial change that was done, and authors have published this. We hope that this document is also now ready for working group last call. Hao-Mian, go ahead.
Question mark at the very end, but I would like to say, okay, yes, I think this document is ready for working group last call, and comments and review are always welcome.
Noted. Next are some of the other working group IDs. We have a native IP. This is on agenda, so I will not go on only thing that I would like to mention that there is some coordination needed between IDR working group, especially with respect to BGP consideration. So this is something that we need to handle at some point of time before we last call this work. So this is something that we can also discuss during the agenda time if there is a need. With FlexGrid, we had a refresh. There was not much technical change in FlexGrid. With SRv6, no major change, but one pending comment from IETF109 is still pending. There is a need to align the SID structure across various documents that is adding SID structure. So that is something that is yet to be done. Just a reminder. With VN Association, we had no update, but the document basically seems to be ready. We had SR path segment, an update where support for SRv6 was added. This was earlier in the appendix, but now it has been moved from appendix to the main body. And one of the flags which was described in this document is actually moved to the binding SID itself, because that's the document that we are sending to ISG first. So it's better to move this flag from path segment to binding segment. For SR bidirectional, I think the main sync is all the changes that were done in the bidirectional ID are also done now in the SR. So this is very good that we are maintaining consistency in our document. So thanks authors for doing that. We have SR policy. This is on the agenda. There is an update which was done even this week, so which is pretty good. We had one issue with the association source, which was resolved on the list. So thanks authors for handling this. and we have the code point allocation request, which is in progress. Anyway, this document is on the agenda, so if there are any questions, we can handle it on the agenda time as well. With local protection enforcement, the early code point was requested and this was allocated. PCCC SR, these are the recent 3 documents that we have adopted between the IETF meetings. We have PCCC SR, the comments which were received during the adoption call are handled, so thanks authors for doing that. We had interdomain, which is on the agenda, so we can discuss anything related to that during the agenda time. And finally, the latest document that we had adopted and which was posted just this Monday is the LSP extended flags. There are still some comments that were posted during the adoption call, so the authors needs to handle that and post a 0.1 version. And with this, the last slide that I have is the working group adoption poll queue. The 2 documents which are on the top of the queue are the multipath, which is again being discussed today, and we have the state sync document between PCEs. And for the rest of the documents, please refer the wiki. If the wiki is out of date or if there is an issue, please reach to chairs and secretary, and we'll make sure that they reflect the true status there is. And with this, I'm done. If there is any questions, otherwise we'll move to the first presentation today. No questions? Then let's go. Mike, you are up.
Yep, thanks, Drew. Yeah, so this is a draft for signaling SR policy candidate paths as part of the PCEP Association. I'll be presenting this draft on behalf of the authors that are listed. Next slide, please. So to give some recent updates, in version 2, we addressed the association ID issue that Drew mentioned earlier. So there was a comment on how the previous version was not doing this association ID allocation, which was kind of not a standard way to behave for an association. So I believe we fixed it in version 02, and we will describe the solution in this presentation. And version 3 and 4 were basically a lot of editorial comments and just cleaning up and restructuring, just moving some text around to make it easier to read and so on, and addressing a lot of kind of editorial issues and to prepare for IN allocation. Next slide, please. So basically, in version 02, we basically encode the policy ID, which is this 3-tuple hidden color endpoint. We encoded as the association parameters, which association parameters, if you recall, is like the key of the association. So basically our association key becomes exactly the same as the policy ID, which is very convenient because our association, in our model, the association actually corresponds to the policy as a group of candidate paths. So the association source in the association object is like an IPv4 or IPv6 address, and so that encodes the hidden part of the policy ID. And we make it mandatory in this draft to include the extended association ID TLV, which follows this special format here, which has the color and endpoint. And so basically this extended ID, acts as like an identifier. It becomes similar to like a a route distinguisher in BGP, right? Sort of. So And we removed one of the TLVs that was there before in the version 01 draft that was used for carrying the SR policy color and endpoint. So that TLV is not necessary anymore because we put the same information into the extended association ID TLV as part of this opaque key. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the example of a problematic situation that we focused on, that we want to prevent any kind of race conditions or something like that. When there's two PCEs that are connected to the same head end, and they both try to create two different candidate paths for the same SR policy. And so they do it at exactly the same time. And so they have to be able to pick an association key without talking to each other, ideally. And basically, the way that the previous version of the draft would resolve this situation is that it would let the head end kind of allocate. Is that basically the PCEs would send like kind of an empty ID, a 0 ID, and the head end would allocate some number for the ID. And it was pointed out that this is a kind of going outside of the existing association, PCEP association standard. So there was kind of a discussion on the mailing list about that. And the solution that we came up with is to just make the color endpoint as part of the key of the association, so that basically when the two PCs want to create two candidate paths for the same policy, they can agree without talking to each other about the association key, right? Because they know the color endpoint of this policy, so they can generate a key from that. And so here you have candidate path A and candidate path B being created at the same time, and they both have color 100 endpoint 999. And as you can see, we put the association source as 111 and association extended ID as 100,999. And so, they're obviously, the two PCs are able to do this without talking to each other, so that, fits our condition. So yeah, that's the change in version 2. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have requested IANA code points, and there's a Cisco proof of concept implementation. There's a Juniper proof of concept implementation. So it'd be really useful, to have code points now, because then we could start testing between the vendors. So that's it for my presentation. I'll leave some time for questions. Thanks.
Are there any questions for Mike? Mike, one thing also I would like to highlight here was that one change is that we use the fixed value 1 for an association ID. That is something also we should ask working group for a feedback if they have any other suggestion that this should be handled. So it would be good to conclude on that as well.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so basically, like I said, we have this extended association ID which encodes the color endpoint. But inside the association object, there is a 16-bit association ID value. And so we basically put the value 1 arbitrarily there. So yeah. So if anybody has any kind of comments or suggestions of what else we can put there, then please let me know. Let us know.
Boris, go ahead.
Very short question, Mike. In implementation status, you say about XR proof of concept. Is this some JXR version or some engineering one?
It's currently like an engineering release. So
Okay.
if another vendor is interested in doing interop, you can ask us for like a engineering smooth or engineering patch to enable the feature, and that can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So let's
Thanks.
move to the next. Let's move to the next presentation, which is SID Algo. Samuel.
Thank you. Hi all, Samuel Sidar from Cisco speaking. I'll be presenting out about carrying SID algorithm in PCEP on the authors mentioned there. Next slide, please. So at first, few words about this draft in general. So it was written to describe the way how we will encode and send prefix-SID algorithm between PCC and PCE, because algorithm is available on PC or PCC, but there was no way to send it between them. And draft is covering two main areas. The first part is about encoding prefix-SID algorithm in ERO hops. That is achieved by adding new night types inside of the ERO with algorithm field included. There is no new change since last IETF, so I will not spend more time on this particular thing, and I will describe more details about second part. Second part is about encoding of algorithm constraint, basically specifying which prefixes can be used in path computation for a specific SR policy. I'll get back to details in later slide or in next slides. Next slide, please. So currently there are two algorithms defined in SR architecture RFC, SPF and staked SPF, and also a range of IDs allocated for FlexAlgo, but definition of this algorithm is out of scope of this draft, and this list is kept just as a reference to indicate what kind of values can be used inside of the algorithm field. Next slide, please. Now to describe changes which happened after last IETF based on comments. So the one flag was removed, the F flag, fallback flag, because there were two flags which were almost same or which had almost same meaning, and because of that it was confusing some people, and it seems to be redundant. So we decided to remove it and keep only one, which was probably more important. And yeah, that was the actual change in TLV for LSPA Object. Next slide, please. Then second part is about about clarification based on comments on last IETF and also based on comments which were done after the IETF. So basically, SID algorithm, which is exchanged or which is described in this draft, is not replacing objective function, RFC. Because the specified algorithm is just used for filtering of all the prefixes during the path computation, but it is not there for it is describing which SIDs can be used during path computation. It is not describing algorithm to find them. So it is not replacing objecting function. And also we explained some details about the L flag usage, actually the last flag, which was mentioned in the last slide as well. So if that flag is not used, then algorithm can be considered as end-to-end algorithm because no SIDs with other algorithm can be used. And there were some questions also about loop avoidance. So basically, with current version of the draft, the loop we are not avoiding the loops. So basically, it is up to implementations to avoid them. I know that there were some comments, so if we can actually discuss that after on next slide. So next slide, please. So if there are any other comments, any questions, feel free to ask.
Any comments? Samuel, there were a lot of questions during the last meeting. So based on your previous slide, can we conclude that all of them have been resolved?
Yeah, I tried to discuss all of them at least between the authors. But if there is anything which is not covered, or if there is any open question, feel free to ask again, or I know I can cover anything, or I can discuss with other authors anything what was not covered.
I think maybe we can take that to the list and get a confirmation from folks who asked the comments, looking at the minutes from the last meeting. That would be the best way forward.
Yeah, sure. If there is really anything what we forget to update in the draft, or what is not clear or explained in the draft itself, then just feel free to open or to open any discussion in the mailing list.
I do have one comment which I will hold it for the next presentation and let the author present the SID verification, and that we can discuss after that. So just hold on to that. If there are no other questions, maybe we'll move to the next presentation. I'm not seeing anyone in the queue. So Ran.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ran, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Zan from GTE. Today, I would like to do the presentation about PCEP extensions for SID verification for SR and PLS. Next, please. Yeah, this is for motivations. Draft Spring segment routing policy describes the SID verification bit uses. SID verification is performed when the head-end is explicitly requested to verify SID by the controller via the signaling protocol used. Implementations may provide a local configuration option to enable verification on a global or per policy or per candidate path basis. FC 8664 specifies extensions to the PCEP that allow a SID state for PCE to compute and initiate TE path as well as a PCC to request a pass subject to certain constraints and optimization criteria in SR network. Because there is no draft that is more relevant to this function. This draft is a supplement to FC 8664. And this draft proposes to define a new flag for indicating the hand end is explicitly requested to verify SID by the PCE. Next, please. Yes, this is for the PCEP extensions. There are mainly two extensions. The first is we extended the wave flag in SR-ERO sub-object for indicating the PCC is explicitly requested to verify SID by the PCE. And the second is we extended the wave flag in SR-RRO sub-object. The format of the SR-RRO sub-object is the same as that of the SR-ERO sub-object, but without the L flag for FC 8664. The wave flag has no meaning in the SR-RRO and is ignored on receipt and the PCE. Next, please. Yeah, this is for next step. We would like to request a review and feedback from the working group. That's all. Thank you.
Mike, go ahead. Mike, go ahead. Mike, can you unmute yourself?
Hi. Yeah, I think something went wrong with the audio. Yeah, I just had a quick question. So you define this flag at the level of the ERO sub-object. I'm wondering if that's the right place to put this flag. Like, do you really need this flag, to have that much granularity to say that you want to verify, each individual, say verify this hop, but not verify the next hop, but verify maybe the next hop after that? Or do you want this flag to be just applicable to the whole segment list or the whole candidate path?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. The reasons for this in YAO or RO, because we would like to align with the extensions of draft PCE SRv6 and draft BGP SR policy. For PCE SRv6, it descriptions with bit is carried in YAO or RO, and for BGP SR policy draft, it describes we bit is carried in segment sub-TLV. Yes, we can discuss. So I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I quickly checked with the IDR also defines it per SID. Looking at the document, Ran, one thing would be in the INA section, please use TDB, don't put the value, don't squat on a code point. Please avoid that. Even in a early draft, we should avoid allocating it ourselves. That's the job of the INA. So please use TDB. I hope my comment was clear. And one related point, yeah. And the second point which I wanted to make was looking at the minutes from 109. I made this idea of having this V flag based on the update that was done for SRv6, and And I think the authors between the two documents decided that it's better that we maintain them separately, that is have SID algo, which is only about algorithm, and keep the verification as a separate. But one thing what we want to avoid is make sure that while we are doing this activity, that anything that is missed between BGP, SR policy and PCEP, if there is any flag, any other things that missed out, then let's fix that once for all, rather than doing it at one document by one document and adding load unnecessarily. So I would request the authors of the both documents, if they can discuss this with the IDR authors as well, and do a thorough check that everything gets aligned between PCEP and IDR. Would that be something that you and Samuel and other people who can do that?
Okay, thank you, Dolph. Yes, I will fix it and will discuss with IDR authors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Samuel, go ahead.
Just there are some proposals about merging some of these drafts also with multi-path draft, because that already introduced path attribute object, and we can potentially merge some of these new attributes into path attribute object as well. But it depends on specific attribute which may be missing in the future.
Okay. My request would be that merge is one part, and another part is we do a proper check as well with the IDR document, and make sure that we are aligned. If there is any other flag or any other thing that's missed, let's do an exercise on the mailing list and make sure that the alignment is there.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
Mentioned
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So next we have Mike again for multipath.
Yeah, so this is a draft for signaling PCEP extensions for signaling multipath information. I'll be presenting on behalf of the authors. Next slide, please. So to give some recent updates, in version 3 and 4, there were kind of very minor editorial changes. And in version 5, we added support for composite candidate path signaling, which was something that was added as part of SR policy architecture. Next slide, please. So this composite candidate path was introduced recently in the Spring work group, and it allows basically an SR policy candidate path to send traffic to other policies on the same head end. And so here I give an example of two candidate paths under the same policy. And one of them is composite, and the other one is just regular explicit candidate path. So CP200, the top one, is the composite one. And CP100, the bottom one, is a regular explicit candidate path. So as you can see, they look very similar. The only thing that's different is that a normal candidate path has a bunch of labels in the segment list, and this composite candidate path has a color. So it has like a pointer to another policy on the same head end. Other than that, basically the two concepts are, or the two data models, I should say, are identical. Next slide, please. So just to make sure everybody understands how this composite candidate path works, I give an example here. So we have basically three policies on the same head end. We have P1, P2, which are just regular policies, and they're labeled green and blue, respectively. And we have P100, which is this example policy that I gave previously. And this P100 contains a composite candidate path. And so, as you can see, the composite candidate path labeled in red, instead of pointing to a segment list, it points to these two child policies, P1 and P2, via their colors. So it says like weight 1 SR policy color 1, right? And weight 2 SR policy color 2. So the color is enough for the head end to figure out the child policy. And so when the traffic hits policy 100, if candidate path 200 is active, then it's gonna do weighted ECMP based on W1, W2 into the policies P1 and P2. And those policies are gonna take their traffic and again ECMP it based on their own weights into their segment lists. So it provides kind of a very powerful, way to steer traffic. Next slide, please. So the signaling for this, we kind of went with the simplest possible approach, is we reused a color TLV from this draft PCET constraints. So it just defines a color TLV, and we put this color TLV into the path attribute object to basically mean that this segment list within the candidate path is basically pointing to this color. And we, in that case, we require the SR ERO to be empty because it's not using actual labels as the output, it's using a color. So yeah, we're kind of open to other ways to signal this. We can discuss it in more detail on the mailing list or here. But basically all we need is to say that say that there's a color, and the rest remains the same. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we will wait for work group adoption and we can discuss. I'll leave some time for question answers. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions? Pawan, would you like to talk about your question that you posted on the chat?
Hi, this is Pawan Biram, Juniper. It wasn't more of a question. There are currently a couple of documents that do define the color TLV. Originally, I think for SR paths, we thought just putting it in that extended association ID would be sufficient. But as you can see, there are use cases where we do need a explicit TLV to be there. I was just pointing out that there are already two documents that propose it. We need a single placeholder, and the authors of the two documents will sync up and make sure that happens.
Thank you, Pawan. One more point would be that the working group should also think whether TLV is the best way forward. There are some other solutions, as Mike was also suggesting. I think the implementers prefers TLV, and that's completely fine. But let's discuss this and resolve on the list.
Yep, sounds good.
And just a reminder that this is next in line for our working group adoption as well. So start reviewing and handling those things right now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's move to the next section, which is stateful PCE related documents and PCCC related documents. The first one that we have is native IP. Boris?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Boris Hasanov. So today, on behalf of our co-authors, I will deliver a short update about PCEP extension for native IP network. Next slide, please. Very shortly, observation, why do we need it? This is most important part in whole solution for implementing PCE for native IP network. Currently, we have 2 other documents, RFC 8735, which describe different scenarios of such solution, and most important, some simulation results, which was done. We also have NTIA's working group PCE native IP architectural draft, which is now in RFC editor queue. And this document describes the practical part of whole architecture and about PCEP extensions, which are needed for that. Next slide. Thank you. So very short recap of solution itself. We have native IP network where we do not have MPLS, LSP, RSVPT, or SR, SRv6 based transport. But we have PCE, which we want to implement to optimize traffic steering in this network. How can we do this? By means of PCE, we can calculate optimal path between PEs and can provision multiple BGP sessions on PE routers and also route reflectors depending on the scale of the network. We can also provision mapping between prefixes and next hops, which will be used, so which BGP session we will use for particular traffic. So by means of that, we can steer traffic in different paths and by using different BGP sessions. So all of this can be accomplished by help of PCE and PCEP extensions. Please, next slide. So basically, what do we have here? We have update about capability advertisement, modification of existing PCEP messages. We introduced new PCEP objects and obviously error types, and also very briefly touched procedures, how it will work overall, and some considerations for operations. Next slide, please. So most important, we have to advertise capability for using PCE native IP, and we can do this by introducing new PAFC type capability TLV, where new PST, which will be defined later on, shows what PCC and PCE are capable to support this implementation. Also, according to PCECC PCEP extensions draft, we also use PCECC capability sub-TLV, but we want to add additional flag about native IP capability additionally to L flag, which introduces PCECC capability. Next slide, please. So in terms of PCEP messages, we follow RFC 8281 PC initiated model. So we have modifications for PC initiate message by adding 3 new objects where basically were mentioned here BGP peer information, explicit route information, and basically PPA object which we are using for association prefixes and next hop. And same objects will be added also to path computation update message as mentioned here. Next slide, please. So we also will reuse CCI central controller indication object from PCEP extension draft because obviously we rely on PCECC model where PCE will program our native IP, let's call them routers in our network. So CCI object will be also reused in our solution. Basically, most important here, what we will use symbolic path name TLV, which should be included to this object as sort of anchor to our PCEP objects. Next slide, please. BGP PRN4 object is used to program our routers to let them know how to set up, how to build BGP session and with whom. So basically, as you can see, we have two types of objects for IPv4 AFI and IPv6 AFI. And basically, we provide we instruct our P router which loopback use for particular BGP session, which own loopback use for particular BGP session, and which remote IP address of remote BGP neighbor is used to set up a BGP session. Next slide, please. Explicit per route object is basically used for creating sort of traffic engineering like approach in native IP network when we want to use a specific path to steer the traffic, to use specific next hop, specific interface for particular BGP session. Next slide, please. And basically, we also should explain to our routers, as I said, mapping between prefix and peer IP address for BGP session. How, like, which BGP session will be used for steering traffic to which IPv4 or IPv6 prefixes. So that's why we need this PPA object here. A format is also described. Next slide, please. And obviously, we will need additional or new error type and error values for such approach. Like if we have some errors with not matching autonomous system numbers or IP address can be reached, etc., etc. Some issues with BGP session, etc. So this is current list of such error types and error values, which could be used to help operations team to recognize what's wrong or what's wrong happened with particular traffic steering in this solution. Next slide. Very short update or recap about procedures. So basically, we have some network with native IP based, no MPLS, no SR, as I mentioned here. but we have SDN controller or network controller with PC functionality which support those additional PCEP extensions. When we want to build particular path for traffic steering, our controller sends PCEP messages to routers, for example, R1, R7. If we have quite big network, we also could use route reflexer for programming sessions, not for full mesh, not for full BGP mesh, but only for BGP session towards particular route reflector. This PCEP message will have BGP peer info object with unique symbolic path name TLV, which I mentioned earlier, that could be used for identification, symbolic identification, constant identification of this particular path. So according to these instructions, which PCC will get from PCE, we will build those multiple BGP sessions. Next slide, please. After that, in previous slide, if we will use only BPI, obviously to reach BGP next hop, IP address of our BGP peer, we, for example, in case of inter-IS, we will follow IGP shortest path, the so-called like best effort approach. If we want to use traffic engineering-like approach, we will also construct our routers by means of explicit per route object. When we will provision from PCE explicit path, we will provision how to reach particular BGP next hop via which particular interface or IP route. Most important thing here is to what such information, such instruction from PCE should have highest priority when versus existing, for example, static routes configured on our routers to make them more preferable. Next slide, please. And last step in such solution is provisional instruction from a controller from PCE about which prefixes will be mapped to which BGP sessions. So for this purpose, we will use PPA object. And this is final step in whole procedure. After that, routers will know like how to reach, how to build BGP session and with whom, how to reach this particular BGP next hop, either by means of IGP, for example, shortest path, or by means of sort of traffic engineering like explicit route, and which prefixes traffic for which prefixes will be used in this particular BGP sessions, like how traffic steering will work. So this is final step. Next slide, please. So from operations point of view, we tried to summarize some important things, practically important things. So the purpose is to have, the purpose of this solution is build lightweight programmable BGP session setup and explicit route deployments and traffic steering. Obviously, this will require additional work for planning. For example, loopback address planning and distribution. So everything should be done in advance, and it obviously will require careful planning. All other things which are mentioned here were pretty much similar to our PC-based solutions like state synchronization mentioned here. Obviously, if one of the routers will fail by some reasons, PCE should detect this and recalculate topology. And topology, as it's described in architectural drive, should be derived to controller by other means, for example, BGP link state. And if we have opposite case, when router will have some issues to connect PC, or PC will go on also due some failure, etc., etc. So during such time, this provisioning information will be kept in stale state until PC will return back. And we also should make sure what PCE will take in account possible loops in our network to exclude, because now we have just IP forwarding. It's also a possible issue, so we have to take care about this. That's all. And finally, so we will appreciate comments, feedback to prepare to last call.
Are there any questions for Boris? Boris, one thing which is missing is, first of all, thank you for adding this operational consideration, but similarly, we should add a section which is impact on BGP, or what is the things that we would like to get an opinion from the IDEA working group, and we need to coordinate with them and get reviewed as well. So maybe you can start working on that. I see the security consideration is also empty, so I think that's something to worry about. There are impacts to security here that we should highlight. One more item which I think is the name PPA, which stands for Peer Prefix Association. And as you know, in PCEP, we use the association object, and it's pretty overloaded with multiple association types. So if you can think of maybe finding a term that doesn't use association, I think that can also help and avoid confusion later on.
Okay, I got your point.
That's it from my side. Thanks for working on this document.
Thank you, Dhruv. Thank you, everyone.
Any other comments on this? Otherwise, we'll move to the next. Okay, let's go to interdomain. Olivier?
Me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hello, everybody. So this is a brief status on extensions for interdomain tunnel stateful setup. So the goal of this draft is to ease coordination between PCE spawned in different domain to set up tunnel and to stitch them in an independent way, without requesting any additional signaling that is mostly not set up or forbidden between carrier, between BGP routers, and in addition to leave each carrier free of the way they are enforce the tunnel. So we could stitch MPLS RSVPT, MPLS segment routing tunnel, for example. So this is an update since the working group adoptions, and I thankfully everybody that supports the draft. So the version 0.0 is just the following working group adoption, and is the latest version of the individual draft. And we upload version 0.1, which take into account the comments received during this working group co-adoption, except the comment about the implement options, which is the discussion for today, and that we aim to solve with the feedback from the working group before producing version 0.2. So next slide, please. So in terms of implementation requirements, the stitching label principle required at least a certain number of modifications in the current PCEP version. At least we need new PCE capability to announce the interdomain behavior between PCE and also between PCE and PCC. So this is in terms of implementation to request a new code point for this PCE capability. We need also a new PCE association group because from a PCE point of view, you have to manage to associate interdomain tunnel. So you have local tunnel which is enforced in the domain this PCE is controlled, but also because this PCE is discussed with this neighbor PCE to continue to prolongate the interdomain tunnel, we need to associate the different parts in order to have something consistent. In particular, from a management point of view, when we would remove the tunnel, we would update this interdomain tunnel, or if a PCC or a PCE reboot, and we need to reassociate the different local part. So again, this needs a new code point for the association group. Then we need to have some new PCEP error message, of course, to manage the stitching label exchange. And now we need also a mechanism to convey the stitching label itself. And there is many possibility, and we request help from the working group to choose between several options and adopt the best of one. So next slide, please. So what are the technical solutions? And we identify at least three different options. The first one is the one which is in the current version of the draft. It associates explicit root object and record root object in conjunction with a new path setup code point to exchange this stitching label. So the stitching label is part of ERO and ARO, and the PST allow PCE to request an interdomain path to a PCC or a neighbor PC. So it's a simplest in terms of implementation because it's just new code point on existing object. But as mentioned by Drew during the working group call adoption, each time a new path enforcement appears, a new PST code point must be allocated, and typically it will be the case with a new SRv6, so segment routing v6, where we need again a new PST. So perhaps not the best solution. The second possibility is again to use this ERO and ERO, but in conjunction with a new flag in the LSP object. So it is as simple as the PST code point, but we need to use the new LSP extended flag subobject because the current flag in the LSP object are all of the flags are used, and so we need to go to this LSP extended flag subobject, which have been recently adopted as a working group draft. And there is some alternate solution where we could try to find another place for the flag, for example, in the SRP or LSPA object. And the third option is to define a new PCEP subobject TLV within the LSP to convey explicitly the stitching label. So this avoid to use explicit root object and record root object to convey the stitching label. So perhaps it's more independent, and because we explicitly convey the stitching label, so perhaps we could avoid some error when a PCC, in particular a PCC, will convey the ERO and ERO. It could be more secure. I mean, it will be more independent because carrier will not have to exchange some ERO or ERO between PCE. They just exchange this stitching label. But this need extra parsing in the PCEP grammar from an implementation point of view. And just to finish, next slide, I try to elaborate a bit more this third option by proposing a first attempt for a new stitching label sub-object where we could convey the stitching label itself for 20 bits, of course, and some flag, and also the possibility to carry the traffic class. So that could be of interest if, for example, we could manage some diff-serve continuity between carrier, where the TSC could be exchanged if we have some agreement between carrier. And also the possibility to specify if we stitch or if we nest the path between two carrier. So the mic is open to get your feedback. I've also started a thread on the mailing list to discuss this point. And I think it's very important to collect feedback from working group before going to version 02. Will change the implementation option or for this interdomain stateful. Thanks.
Thanks, Olivier. Any questions? Any feedback on these three options? Hari, go ahead. Hari, we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The question is like why the second option is considered as a con, as in like using LSP extended object is seen as a negative thing. It's a good thing, right? It's an LSP extended object TLV, and you can use it.
I don't know. It's not. When I tried each time to find pro and cons, and finally the only concern is that using this extended LSP flag subobject is that we just need to synchronize the two drafts, and that the LSP extended flag subobject must be adopted first and implement first before this one could be adapted and implemented. So it's more a constraint in terms of dependence from an overdraft in terms of implementation.
Okay, thanks.
Any other feedback? Thanks, Olivier, to start the thread. So far, I'm the only one who has provided any inputs. I request others in the working group to provide their thoughts, like which is the best way forward, and so that we can make some progress here.
Okay, thanks.
Olivier, regarding the third proposal that you have, that is maybe you can add a pointer to that so that people can understand this a little bit better. Maybe you can even put the link to this presentation so that people can understand the third option a little better.
Okay, I will add it.
Thank you. Next, we have Giuseppe for IFIT.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody. This is an update about the PCEP extensions for IFIT. We are at the 02 version on next slide. Yeah, just some words about background and motivation. IFIT refers to data plane on-path telemetry techniques, in particular inbound OM and as passive performance measurement technique, we can consider alternate marking, and you can also see the reference document for this in-band techniques. The PCEP extension that we are defining in this document allow to signal the IFIT capabilities. This is valid for all part types. So in the latest version, we have generalized this application. So the TLVs that we are defining here can be encoded, can be carried inside the LSPA attributes object, and can be applied for all part types, of course, as long as they support the relevant data plane telemetry method. So next. Yeah, in this slide, we want to summarize the main changes from 0.1 to 0.2 version of this draft. We got some input from Mike about the possibility to consider the case of different IFIT methods for each segment list. Okay, we didn't consider, but it's something that is possible to do, since the IFIT attributes TLV that we are defining can be added, for example, into the path attribute object, as also previously discussed by Mike, instead of the LSPA object. And we added a short paragraph in the latest version to highlight this possibility. In addition, another change was related to the addition of alternate marking mode. So the possibility to signal the hop by hop or end-to-end measurement. And also it was updated the reference to the companion document in IDR that has been adopted. So next. Yeah, the first thing is about the IFIT capability advertisement, that of course we need to advertise the IFIT capabilities, and we define the TLV that you can see with the 5 flags that are according to the in-band OM and the alternate marking related document. Of course, the flag must be sent by both PCC and PC in order to support the instantiation. So next slide. Yeah, this is about the IFIT attributes TLV that provide the knobs of the IFIT feature. As I said, it can be included as a TLV in the LSPA object. And the IFIT TLVs are optional and can be taken into account by the PC during path computation and by the PCC during path setup. Of course, this can be also applicable to the SR policies, and in this case, these TLVs also complement the PC segment routing policy CP draft. Next. Yeah, in this slide, we are going to detail the different sub-TLVs. These are the sub-TLVs for in situ OM. So you can see all the 4 options: the pre-allocated, incremental, directory export, and edge to edge. Next. Yeah, this is the other sub-TLV related to alternate marking. And you can see the new fields that we have added about the hop by hop, the signaling of hop by hop or end-to-end measurement. So next. Yeah, as I said, as an example in the draft, we added some consideration about how this draft complement the PC segment routing policy draft in PC. In particular, we added the reference to the relevant operation already described in that draft. And in particular for PC initiated LSP, if the IFIT feature is enabled, the IFIT TLVs must be included in the LSPA object in the PC initiate message. After the successful instantiation of the LSP, of course, the methods can be applied based on the corresponding data plane methodology, and you can see also the reference of the relevant document about the data plane. To enabling, disabling, or changing some features of the IFIT, the attributes TLV must be included in the PC update message. Next. Yeah, this is the final slide. So we welcome questions, comment, and we also have to consider the working group adoption.
Are there any questions? Boris, go ahead. Boris, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Giuseppe, do you plan to add implementation or interop section later on?
Yeah, it's something that we can consider. Yes.
Thank you.
It's a good suggestion.
Giuseppe, also thank you for keeping the documents aligned between the IDR working group and the PCE. So in the past we have had a problem. So I see that, like, the updates that you have made here are well aligned with IDR. So thanks for doing that. One comment related to the EAM, where you have added the some new flags. Would you want to also create an INA registry for this, or for some reason we don't want to? I wanted to understand. The R part, I believe, is reserved bits, and you are using H and E as a fixed set of flags. Do we want to do like make a registry for this, or do you want this to be a fixed set of flags, and why?
Yeah, I think we would like to have a fixed set of flags because, yeah, we are working together also to other data plane documents, and in that document there are two possibilities to use alternate marking that are hop by hop or end-to-end. So considering that, for example, in SRv6 you can use hop by hop option or destination option, it's better to have these flags that are signaled in order to choose the right option for the data plane.
Okay, because most of the other sub-TLVs, we are simply saying that the flags fields are as defined in the IOM document. Only for this one, we are defining them inside PCEP and IDR. I just wanted to make sure that's a conscious choice, and if whether are you able to justify why this should not be allowed to be extensible using, like, simple code point procedures that we usually follow. Okay. So just something to think about, and we can discuss more on the list.
Yeah.
So, thank you for your work. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is operational clarification. Mike?
Yeah, hi. I will be presenting a quick update to this PCEP operational clarifications draft on behalf of the authors. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the recent update is just basically on the SRRO object use in segment routing. Next slide, please. So the original PCEP RO object is taken from RSVPT. It's kind of directly encoded. In RSVPT, the RO is optional, meaning that if your tunnel doesn't, or if your LSP doesn't specify record route, then the LSP can still be established, but record route just provides extra information about the path, like label recording, and it's used for node for selecting the node for figuring out the merge point label, basically, the label at the merge point. So in PCEP, we kind of when we define the SR ERO object, we kind of in parallel defined SR RRO, and I don't believe there was any kind of known purpose at that time for why we're doing it, but it was just to kind of try to maintain like parity with RCPT. And so we kind of have this SRRO object, and it's not clear, how it should be used. And so it was found in like the vendor implementations that people were not using it, at least in our testing. So for SRTE, it is enough to just use the SRERO. There's no real need to have like the exact same, object with the exact same content, but just using, a different object type. So we propose to kind of only use SRERO/SRv6ERO, at least until we figure out a better use for this SRRO. So yeah, that's basically the update. If there's any, comments. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Yes, we would like to request workgroup adoption for this draft. And if there's any comments, I would like to leave time for Q&A. Thanks.
Are there any comments for Mike? Mike, regarding the feedback on the RRO, one use case would be that if you remember, we allow NAI only as an option, that PC can compute the path but doesn't give the label stack. It can only give it can carry the path in NAI without allocating the sits, and the PCC could pick the sits. I know most of the implementation don't implement that. Maybe that's why we never saw anybody using it. That could be the reason. Maybe more investigation is needed on this.
But I believe that option is allowed by the SRERO, right? Because you have the exact same, NAI and all this stuff like this F and.
Okay, so your the thinking in the idea, what I had was that maybe ERO is supposed to be the path that PCE selects, and if based, and if that is NAI only, maybe it will remain NAI only, and in the SRRO, the actual translation with the label plus this should be done. That was what I was thinking. I'm also not sure that is ever mentioned in the RFC. So a clarification is definitely needed, but whether it is that we should not use, or we clarify what is the place we should actually use and where we can ignore it, could be something to think about. Andrew, I think you have some thoughts on this as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually didn't think or heard of that before. So that's certainly an interesting use case of RO. Just to add to it, the text as proposed in this operational document doesn't explicitly prohibit RO. It's simply saying that, as we've seen, with previous implementations, that most vendors are not reporting an RO, probably because, like as you mentioned, we're not actually implementing that NAI functionality. So it's not necessarily prohibiting it. It does have wording that says, it may carry it. However, it might be basically excluded. Therefore, you should be treating the ERO as an RO kind of situation.
Understood.
Yeah, in like RSVPTE, right, the RRO object is is very specific. Like it has a very specific purpose, right? It's something that you send, in the path message, and then you get back in the RESV message with, the labels, the recorded labels, and a bunch of other stuff. So, like, to assign it this extra meaning of, this extra meaning for SRTE, it requires at least some special kind of statement. You can't just, so I'm okay with, like, adding, if we can find some kind of a meaning for it, then that's perfectly fine with me.
Pawan, go ahead.
In terms of modeling paths, right? I mean, at least the approach we typically take is there is a intended path, and then there is the actual path that's used. And we have typically used the RRO to reflect the actual path. If ever there is a difference between what is the intended path and the actual path, you do need two separate paths. I believe, operationally, like I agree with Mike that there's probably no such instance, but there are, you never know. There will be instances where you push down something in the arrow, but when you program, it may be different. The NA
Yeah,
thing,
but
one example.
But it's kind of that that was my point, is that this kind of diverges from the original RSVP-TE meaning of RRO, right? Which is not really like the...
No, RRO basically is a record route, right? So it's basically, it doesn't necessarily mean that you signal it. It just means that what is the actual recorded route.
And it's fully optional, right? So
yeah, I'm not sure. When I believe most implementations, when they are sending the reports, it's the RRO that's used, right? Isn't that? You're now saying we just report the ERO and not the RRO.
Yeah, at least for us, we only report the ERO. I think Andrew has some comments there.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I've seen different vendors like Nokia reports both ERO and RRO, but essentially it's an echo back. But I've seen other vendors only report the ERO. Now, like Mike's saying, it's essentially it's a pointless kind of data structure, right? Because it's just an echo back in the current implementations. But I definitely agree with the van that, yeah, if there's any differences in the ERO and RRO, then it does have value signaling it. This text is mainly just to say that, hey, this is just what's been observed operationally, and to continue to interop, we need to make sure that the behavior of processing the ERO and RRO and treating the differences between a signaled and requested path versus actual path is at least described. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think we are over time on this one.
Thanks, folks.
Okay. So, Waimo, you are next.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, Waimo, can you try to finish in 8 minutes? That would be really
Yeah, okay, I'll
useful.
try as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to present PCE for BATE path. Next page. So for PCE to support BATE path, so we should have a PCE connected to the edge of the domain, BATE domain, and also for example, PCEA is connected to the edge of the right cloud, and then this PCEA will also connect to another PCE, such as PCEB. So PCEB is for a domain which contains multicast source. A normal procedure for creating a BAPE path is that the egress node will send a report to the PCEA, and then I'm joined to a multicast tree. And then after PCEA receive this kind of egress join, and then PCEA will try to find the ingress node for multicast tree, and then PCEA will send a request to PCEB for computer egress node. PCEB will reply egress node to PCEA, and then PCEA have all the information about the tree. Ingress node and the egress node PCEA will compute path after the computer pass, it will encode the pass using bit position for BAPE pass, and then send this pass to Ingress node. So after receive this information, an Ingress node will set up a pass, and then send the report message to PCEA, and then PCEA will record this message. So this is a sequence of steps for creating a creating a BATE pass. Next page. So this page gives more application scenarios. So another scenario is that PCE pass may BATE pass may change. For example, when one of the existing Ingress node may just leave the tree. So after PCEA receiving this updated information, it will recompute a new pass and then send this new pass using maybe update message to the Ingress node. So Ingress node, after receiving this new pass, will replace the old pass with this new pass, and then send a report message to the PCE, and then PCE will record this information. So another application scenario is that PCEA may just receives request from a user, and then user will give more information such as ingress and egress nodes, and then PCEA will just compute P2 BATE pass and then encode the pass using bit position, and then send this pass to the ingress node, and then ingress node will set up a pass and then send a report to the PCE. So next page. So in order to support BATE pass, and then we need to have a number of extensions to PCE. First, we need an extension to number of PCE objects, such as we will have to support capability, and then extension to SRP, and then a new ingress node object, and then new object functions for this special BATE pass, and then BATE pass objects. And then with these object extensions, and then we will also extend a number of PCEP messages, such as report messages and update message, init message, and the request message, and the reply messages. And in addition to that, we have a number of procedures to operate the BATE pass. Next page. So this is more details about the extensions. First, we need to have capability exchanges between PCE speakers. So we should have pass setup type TLV. So this TLV will contain a special type which is for BATE pass. And in addition to that, we have a sub TLV associated with this PST. So this sub TLV will contain information about what's the size of the SI field, and then what's the size of a bit string. Next page. So the extension to SRP, like we have, so this SRP will contain those pass setup type with a new PST. In addition to that, we define 3 contiguous bit flags. So these 3 bit flags will be used defined as system operations. So we define 3 operations, such as join, multicast group or source, and then leave from multicast group and source, and then ingress node computations. Next page. So in addition to that, those are extensions to SRP, and then we define a new TLV we call the multicast traffic TLV or multicast traffic information TLVs. So basically, this TLV will contain the information about multicast traffic that a pass will be carried. So this TLV will contain multicast group address prefix or multicast source address prefix. So we have 2 types of multicast group address prefix and multicast source address. One is for IPv4, another is for IPv6. So next page. So this is for IP multicast group address prefix, one for IPv4 and another for IPv6. Next page. So we have multicast source address prefix, one for IPv4 and one for IPv6. Next page. So we also define a new object we call the English note object. So this object will be used when a PCE computer English note, and then English note will be represented by one of these objects. So we have two object type. One is for IPv6 and another is for IPv4. So in addition, we also define object especially for BAT path. So we need because for BAT path we have different objectives. So one is the minimum bit size, and that one is the minimum bit distance. So next page.
We are out of time, so maybe let's take question, Ran.
Yeah, it's done, almost done. Go next page. Next, just almost done. Yeah. Yeah, this is more details. Yeah, we can go to questions. Yes.
Ran, go ahead.
We have some first thank you for your work, and we have submitted the PCE BRT draft in 2015, and it is now in the working group adoption queue. Please refer to the PCE wiki and please review it, and any comments are welcome. Thank you.
Yes, that's a good question. I refer your document in my draft. So basically, that draft just suggest or propose a very minimum of extensions. Basically, focus on the subject. There's a BFP path ERO sub-object. I think that's I mentioned. I already described a reference to that.
Yeah, Huaibo, I think the main concern here would be that you should build on the existing rather than redefinition. So currently PST and some of the things we are redefining in your document, for that you should refer to the existing document, and whatever you think is missing, that's the thing that you should add in your document. Anyway, we are out of time, so let's move to the next presentation. Thank you. Gyan, you are next.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Gyan Mishra. I'm with Verizon, and I'm providing an update for PCEP LS, PCEP extension for distribution of link state and TE information. Next slide. So with this update, what I'd like to do is, the goal is to really kick off the update, the discussion again on the mailing list. So there has been a lot of discussion in the past, so we would like to just kick this off again and, positioning this draft as experimentals. So with that, very quick recap. So the use of PCEP to learn the network topology and state, applicable to device to controller as well as controller to controller, so HPCE, complementary extension. So this is basically another tool. So the doors that has been open, we have other options in the operator's toolbox. So you can think of this as really just another tool in the operator's toolbox. We have BGPLS and NetConf, and now with this PCEP LS just provides another option that we can take advantage of, enabling the use of a single control plane protocol as an SPI in some scenarios. A new PCEP message. LS capability TLV with PCEP object type, and reuse the TLVs already defined. Defaults is local only. Remote learn information can be enabled. Next step. Next slide. So as a rough summary of where we left off on the mailing list. So basically we all know there's the presence of other ways to do this, and some consider them better. comparing. So what we want to do is we want to look at all options, just keeping the door open versus comparing one versus the other. We just want to keep an open mind and just look at this as really another option, or with the operator in the operator's toolbox to utilize for certain use cases. PCEP scalability worries, operational complexity. Does this require multi-vendor interoperable RFCs? So some of the questions that have come up in the past on mailing list. Consensus on use of PCEP as SBI. In some PCEP CC centralized controller scenarios, there's a direct PCEP session with the nodes, leveraging the direct PCEP session to also learn the topology and changes. It can be an attractive option. Usefulness in HPCE, interdomain model for interlayer, optical, etc. Another tool, so that's the big one, another tool in the toolbox for operators. So we're not replacing anything, and so we don't want to go down the road of comparing one versus the other. We're just saying that this is really another option that we're giving the operator to pick and choose based on use cases or where it can be used. For instance, we recognize that some may want to use Yang paths for computation RPC instead of PCEP in both scenarios, and we support all approaches. So we're completely open. We're not saying one way or the other. We just want to keep that door open, and this is just another option in the operator's toolbox. Next slide. Some use cases and scenarios where PCEP LS is an attractive choice. So PCEP PCECC centralized control SDN model. Some use cases require direct PCEP sessions to all nodes. Reusing that same session to also learn the local network state is attractive. So we already have the session is there. Why not reuse that PCEP session for BGP-LS TLV? PCEP LS. Enable the possibility of an SBI protocol for some use cases. HPCE for interdomain model between controllers for boundary nodes as part of the abstract domain topology. And then partial. So this is important that we're not saying really we want to say using PCEP LS for the entire solution. We can have a hybrid model, so partial solution. So we can use a variety, the other options that are available in the operator's toolbox. It doesn't have to be just one or another. So some information such as optical extensions, learned via PCEP LS for fast learning, reusing PCEP synchronization optimization techniques, and incremental updates. And there are other mechanisms can also coexist. Next slide. So the flow of information and control. So on the left side, we have the PCEP PCECC centralized SDN controller model. So here we're reusing the SBI. So from the network elements, reusing the SBI for the PCEP LS, the new LS capability TLV with the LS object type, gathering the information pushed up towards the PCECC controller, and then that same SBI on the right side that being used to push the state information updates and report and update messages, PCECC instructions down to the network elements. On the right side diagram showing the information and control in the inter-AS domain using HPCE. On the left side, on the left here in the right diagram, PCEP LS boundary nodes. So we have the network elements pushing up the PCEP LS capability TLV with the LS object types for link, node, and prefix pushed up from the PCE, the child control, the child PC up to the parent PC, and then that same SBI not being used for the rest of the standard HPCE that's used today to push down the report and update messages and synchronization on the right side PCEP down to the network elements. Questions to the work group. So what we want to see is there enough interest by some in the work group to work on this? Are there target experiments, demos, implementations? So some were showcased in the past in hackathon and in bits and bytes. Some open source implementations exist and documented. Some researchers have shown interest and experimented some operators have shown interest as well. Is there a possibility of somewhat rough consensus or support for this as an experimental ID? Some of the experimented results to collect would be the next steps. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions or comments or any related to this document, and moving forward, trying to kick off the discussion on the mailing list, positioning this draft as an experimental draft. Thank you.
We have 1 minute, so questions, please. Mike, go ahead.
Personally, like from Cisco implementation, we don't have much interest in this, to be honest, because we already have BGP LS, which works, and if we go and implement this, it's there's always a lot of code churn, that happens, and so there has to be a really good justification for doing something like this. Not just to say, okay, here's another way to do the same thing that is already done. So yeah, that's just my answer to your kind of poll. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And does the use cases which are highlighted here, does that maybe if you are implementing PCCC or HPC or doing optical IP plus optical, would that be something of an interest?
I haven't thought about that, but we would prefer to stick with with existing BGPLS, unless there is a clear case where something cannot be done with BGPLS.
Any other comments from the group? Otherwise, we should take this to the list and continue the discussion. Julian, we are out of time, so maybe last words from you. We are sorry for the last presentation. We could not make time. So Julian, go ahead.
Yes, so thank you everyone for this meeting and attending this virtual online gathering. That's the opportunity to say a last thank you to Deborah. It was a pleasure working with you, so we hope we'll be able to meet again in the near future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.